Space Marines. Walking slabs of muscle and metal, armed with the finest armor and weapons the Imperium of Man can provide. In power armor, they're around 7 to 8 foot tall, and weigh about as much as a Fiat 500. Looking at them, you'd think they'd be slow, but they're lightning fast. Space Marines chiefly act as shock troops, ripping through the enemy in lightning-swift assaults. They're basically walking tanks after all. Yet, what do they do when speed is not enough, or not an option? This is a more common situation for Space Marines than you might think. Whether it's purging a Space Hulk, fighting in a boarding action, or storming the breach in a city wall, when the enemy must be broken by sheer might alone. When the Marine needs to laugh as they saunter through the enemy's greatest guns, well, that's when they deploy Terminators. There's an old story about knights on crusade walking through a Saracen arrow storm, laughing and calling the arrows rain. Imagine that, but replace the arrows with tank shells and you'll have a good idea of what Terminator armor is like. Officially called Tactical Dreadnought Armor by the Mechanicus, this really does turn a Marine into a miniature dreadnought, able to shrug off nearly any blow. It's the single best protection any Space Marine can have. Terminator armor's origins, according to Horus Heresy Book 1 Betrayal 2012, are from industrial equipment. Originally, these giant suits were used for the maintenance of plasma reactors. This enabled their users to wade through what is essentially a miniature star, to check the internal components of active reactors. Terminator armor as we know it was adapted from these suits, undergoing changes to their design to be more suited for war. Like most technology within the Imperium of Man, Terminator armor comes in various patterns and marks. This is largely due to the constant bitter feuding within the Adeptus Mechanicus. Forge Worlds jealously hoard knowledge, so when they do produce a new type of Terminator armor, they're often the only ones who can produce it. All forms of Terminator armor bear similarities to standard Astartes power armor, sharing numerous common design elements. These include having the same power source, that being a miniature fusion reactor, full environmental sealing, allowing the wearer to operate in the void or other extreme environments. Unlike regular power armor though, Terminator armor is built around an exoskeleton of adamantium ribs. These are fitted with giant plates of plasteel and ceramite, protecting the internal systems and the wearer. The whole system is able to move via electrically motivated fiber bundles. The armor is quite organic in its design, the plates acting as the skin, the adamantium skeleton is the bones, and the fiber bundles even look a lot like muscle, as well as acting like it. The very first kind of Terminator armor ever used by the Imperium is, well, now, Saturnine. For those unaware, at the time of recording and writing this script, Horus Heresy 3rd edition has only recently been released, and one of the new kits for this edition is the Saturnine pattern Terminator armor, and it's been a bit of a bombshell for canon lore. So hold on to your hats, there's a lot to unpack here as it contradicts at least a little bit of existing canon. For example, in Horus Rising 2006, the very first book in the Horus Heresy series, it was established that Terminator armor was first introduced late during the Great Crusade. However, the new Saturnine lore says it was introduced during the late Unification Wars. This is one of the most major retcons introduced with Saturnine. Most of this lore comes to us from Warhammer Community, as in the news site. Chiefly the Saturnine Terminator armor, the lore article, released 16th of June 2025. Games Workshop has done its best to fit Saturnine into existing canon, but it's not been perfect. Saturnine armor comes from a sect of tech priests who were exiled from Mars. They took up residency on Phoebe, the 9th moon of Saturn, where they established an alternative tech canon. This is like what different denominations of Christianity are to each other. The different tech canons of Forge Worlds all agree regarding the existence of the Omnissiah, but disagree on the specifics. Basically, it's a religious schism over whether a piece of tech should have 3 USB ports or 2. Ideas which later birthed all things Saturnine pattern. How Mars feels about Saturnine pattern technology is unknown, but knowing the Mechanicum, we're sure they're screeching about tech heresy, or at least may have been at some point. The Saturnine armor from Phoebe isn't actually the Saturnine armor we're seeing being used in the tabletop though. We in fact know very little about the Saturnine armor deployed during the Unification Wars and early Great Crusade, save that it was quickly replaced by other patterns due to how difficult it was to make. The versions we see on the tabletop were crafted by the Primarch of the Salamanders, Vulcan himself. Going into the Horus Heresy, the armor designed by the Lord of Drakes is still extremely hard to produce. Likely still following the standard design for Terminator armor, Saturnine is notably heavier and bigger, featuring an extended adamantium exoskeleton to support its massive armor plates. Saturnine's bulkier design means it boasts a far more powerful reactor than any other kind of Terminator armor. This means that it can have a powerful dispersion field, which is a type of force field, allowing Saturnine armor a chance to survive even the mightiest anti-armor weaponry. Along with powering a force field, this immense reactor allows Saturnine armor to be equipped with 2 powerful energy weapons, and so far we've seen them able to mount a plasma blaster, essentially like a shotgun version of a plasma cannon. Imagine if you scooped up a bit of the sun and launched it at someone. That's basically what plasma blasters are. They drench the battlefield in plasma. They also have heavy disintegrators. These are big lasers that turn things to dust. Think any terrible 1950s sci-fi movie. There's also Saturnine Disruption Fists, which are just a type of power fist. Power fists are essentially big, meaty gauntlets with a disruption field generator built into them, so that when they strike their foe, they're ripped apart at the atomic level. The fact these aren't called power fists, though, is just another example of Phoebe's divergent tech cannon from Mars. On these special power fists often will be mounted particle shredders. We don't know what these do exactly. However, the Necrons also possess a weapon called a particle shredder. If the Imperial particle shredder works like the Necron one does, according to the 5th edition Necron Codex 2011, the particle shredder fires out a beam of antimatter particles that detonate on contact with the target, blasting them apart. We've even seen Space Marine Praetors wearing Saturnine armor wielding giant power axes and thunderhammers, called Saturnine War Axes and Saturnine Concussion Hammers. Power axes and thunderhammers are both types of power weapons like power fists, meaning they project a disruption field around the weapon, allowing the weapons to rip apart reality, albeit on a small scale. Notice again how they sport different names, due to originating from Phoebe. The development of this is a lot like convergent evolution. In addition to these impressive armaments, Saturnine Terminator armor has an extremely useful piece of tactical tech. Revealed to us in the Warhammer community article, Saturnine, What is Saturnine Terminator Armor? Released the 23rd of May 2025, these suits of Terminator armor have teleport synchronizers built into their shoulder pads. These allow suits to link to a commander's armor, enabling them to pinpoint teleport onto the battlefield. Effectively, this means any Praetor or Centurion in Saturnine armor can summon their bodyguard at will from their ship. This even lets the commander serve as a linchpin of a mass teleport assault. Yet all this does mean a little more is expected of the suit's wearer. In the article, The Horus Heresy Roundtable, The Origins of Saturnine Armor, released the 7th of July 2025, the requirements of what a Marine needs to pilot suits of Saturnine armor were briefly discussed, that being an above-average psychic attunement. Right, let's get into this. The level of psychic ability required for the armor isn't made totally clear. The article says a level is required slightly less than that of a librarian. Does this mean, say, the level of someone with latent psychic powers, like Sevatar of the Night Lords in Prince of Crows 2012? We get to see how latent powers are like a sixth sense. When fighting, Sevatar can see the blow coming in his mind's eye perfectly. This is actually him glimpsing the future via his latent psychic powers. He's nowhere near the level of a librarian, yet even this seems a bit much for what a Saturnine wearer might need. Reason being that this armor has seen mass deployment, according to the Horus Heresy Age of Darkness 3rd edition rulebook 2025. The Iron Warriors attempt to field entire companies equipped with Saturnine armor, so it's more likely it requires Marines with a slight attunement to the warp. Perhaps Marines who know how to read the Emperor's tarot, or ones with an uncanny battlefield sense. To speculate and bring this into established lore, this is likely something akin to a Dreadnought's neural interface. Some Marines simply can't handle being interred within a Dreadnought sarcophagi due to the intense cognitive load. And it's likely this is the same for Saturnine armor. where the psychic ability more refers to will and ability to handle the sheer amount of information coming through the suit's sensors. Without it, a Marine would likely be mentally overwhelmed by the suit. We see something similar in Centurion armor. The Space Marine 6th Edition Codex 2013 tells us that Centurion suits literally enrage the wearer. Some can even lose themselves entirely to the raging machine spirit within the armor. Saturnine seems somewhat similar in this regard, hence the requirement for some psychic talent. Like we said, this is mostly speculation. There's still a lot more coming down the pipeline in regards to Saturnine armor, and hopefully we'll get some more answers soon. Plus, we're likely to see how different legions employ the armor. You see, Vulcan shared the designs for the armor with every legion just before Horus's betrayal, so every legion has it. And we've even already had some hints of variation. Apparently, the Thousand Sons have developed a psychic discipline around it. The Wordbearers are doing something to it with demons. This idea of demonically possessed suits belching up warp-infused plasma is pretty cool. Though it's interesting that Vulcan shared these designs at the time he did. In Vulcan Lives 2013, before Horus raised his banner in rebellion, Vulcan had been working on a mighty hammer called Dawnbringer to give to the War Master, which seemed to be the first in a number of gifts the Lord of Drakes was working on. There's this real undercurrent that Vulcan could see the rift between the Primarchs, and then tried to fix their fractured brotherhood with these gifts. In Angel Exterminatus 2012, we saw that Vulcan had given Perturabo a small wind-up Warhound Titan, something the Primarch by all accounts had enjoyed owning, that incidentally was a near perfect perpetual motion device. Saturnine seems to be another of those gifts to his brothers, in an attempt to somehow unify them. Though by the time this gift was given, it was far too late. The Horus Heresy was already well in motion, so this new armor would first see action with the Drop Site Massacre. We should also mention some of the pre-existing lore for this armor, from before the new releases. In the anthology Medusan 2015, there's a short story called Deeds Endure. This story features a suit of Terminator armor that is shockingly similar to Saturnine. These suits were also made by Vulcan and look nearly identical to Saturnine armor, the chief differences being their armaments, and that they have an extra weapon mounting on the top of their armor. We don't know specifically what they were equipped with. The art of them shows giant chainsawed hands and something like assault cannons. They also appear to be missing the teleportation synchronizers. And it's also worth mentioning that this 2015 story alludes to these armors being a very, very old design, which would corroborate this new lore. So now it seems like these Salamander prototype suits were prototypes from before Vulcan's creation of the standard Saturnine armor, perhaps even the planned next iteration. The Salamanders, in the wake of their losses at the Drop Site Massacre, were then forced to use these suits out of naught but desperation. Before the introduction of Saturnine, the Cataphractii pattern was the granddaddy of Terminator armor, being the very first we ever see used in the Horus Heresy, first appearing in Horus Rising 2006. Cataphractii originates from Holy Mars. It's kinda like an entirely different species to Saturnine. Cataphractii is a lot closer to those initial reactor suits, which are the root of origin of all Terminator armor. Think of those industrial suits as the common ancestor for the different evolutionary lines of Terminator armor. Saturnine is far more divergent than Cataphractii, hence why this armor is so much smaller. However, even though it's a lot smaller, Cataphractii armor is nearly as well armored as Saturnine. Its heavy plating pushed the adamantium skeleton suit to its limits, featuring multiple overlapping plates of ceramite and force field generators in their shoulder plates. Pretty much every joint has some plating covering it. Those that they couldn't armor were covered by terges. Terges are big leather strips, and these might be made of something like groxhide, which is extremely durable and basically super leather. For the Romans and Greeks who used these in reality, these were designed to stop their skirts lifting up. Didn't want to flash the enemy in battle after all. In 40k though, we think they might have had another purpose, to hide the joints. Sure, the enemy knows they're there, but by breaking up the shape it makes them harder to hit. All this weight and strain meant that these suits were renownedly slow, which wasn't a major drawback considering how they were supposed to be employed. Since these suits were mainly used during the early days of the Great Crusade, they mainly were used for the scenarios we covered earlier, where protection was of greater value than speed. In the era of constant sieges and knocking down city walls that was the Great Crusade, Cataphractii armor thrived. According to the Horus Heresy Age of Darkness 3rd edition rulebook 2025, the outbreak of the heresy saw an end to this era, the armor falling out of favor and more recent patterns taking over. Which makes sense considering that the legions were no longer conquering worlds, but instead fighting pitched battles against one another. In that scenario, mobility often matters more. Otherwise, you'll find yourself trudging over an open field at the speed of a snail, the enemy sighting their ordnance on you from over the horizon. Very few suits of Cataphractii made it to the 41st millennium. What few have survived are revered as chapter relics by the chapters lucky enough to possess them, but they're almost never fielded on the battlefield, only ever brought out in moments of pure desperation or the occasional parade. A point we need to raise that's unique to Cataphractii is that it's the only Terminator armor that both the Custodes and Legiones Astartes used. The short story Hands of the Emperor 2015 shows Custodians in Cataphractii. This is often considered odd because the Custodes seem to detest armor that hindered their movements. Custodes are, objectively, frighteningly fast. It is undoubtedly one of their greatest strengths, especially when compared to Space Marines, and they can't really employ that speed whilst within Cataphractii armor. What this looks like is an actual lore example of Custodes being unable to equip their full strength with their rarer gear. So we'd propose this is more likely a fallback suit for the Custodes, one they were forced to employ due to the pressures of the Horus Heresy. This short story is the only instance of Custodes wearing Cataphractii that we could find, and in its preparation for the Siege of Terra. So this was likely a move of desperation, though we're sure the Custodes would have much preferred the Cataphractii's successor. However, when we get a bit closer to the end of this video, we'll cover the Custodes' exclusive patterns of Terminator armor. So, Cataphractii's successor. The Tartaros pattern Terminator armor. This armor rose to prominence in the legions during the Horus Heresy proper. It was, at the time, one of the most advanced suit of armor ever designed. Yet, according to the new 3rd edition rulebook, it was actually introduced alongside Mark IV armor. So before we go any further, we need to address the shifting timeline here. Each edition of Horus Heresy has essentially redone the lore on where the marks and various armors were introduced or reintroduced. The Horus Heresy Age of Darkness 2nd edition rulebook from 2022 stated that Mark VI was the armor used for the majority of the heresy. The impression and lore we get regarding the most common armor from the heresy in the early novels is not Mark VI, but is in fact Mark IV. Horus Rising, False Gods, and Galaxy in Flames all show mainly Marines in Mark IV. A fact reinforced by various official artworks and the Horus Heresy Black Books, which were the rule books for Horus Heresy 1st edition. The latest edition seems to be trying to spread them more evenly. This more even spread has rippled into Terminator armor. Garviel Loken in Horus Rising 2006 wearing his Mark IV armor looking at brand new Cataphractii now just doesn't really fit into the lore we have in 2025. According to the new rulebook, Tartaros became the main pattern used by the legions in terms of generic Terminator armor. Every legion employed Terminator armor differently, and we'll cover that in a bit, but if they needed general purpose Terminators, a heavy unit that could handle any situation, they went for Tartaros. Which, given how adaptable Tartaros is, makes a lot of sense. This is the lightest Terminator armor ever produced by the Imperium in terms of weight. It's extremely streamlined in its design, being hyper energy efficient and agile. Even according to the Liber Astartes 2022, being able to grant their wearers sudden bursts of speed. Sure, Tartaros was far less armored than Cataphractii, however it had much more advanced sensor arrays. Considered a technological marvel by the Mechanicus at the time, it was still plenty protective. Anything shy of a direct hit from a las cannon isn't going to be able to punch through its plating. The main downside of Tartaros, however, was its material cost, and the technical knowledge needed to build it. So after the destruction caused by the heresy, much like Cataphractii, the knowledge on how to make Tartaros was lost. This is because of the way the Mechanicus handles distributing knowledge. Tech priests hoard knowledge, the same way dragons hoard gold. So when a tech priest, who is the only one who knows how to make a singular, vital component of a larger design, dies, the Imperium whole loses the ability to produce anything that uses that component. And again, much like Cataphractii, pretty much no suits of Tartaros have made it into the 41st millennium. The few that have are held as revered chapter relics, given only to the greatest heroes of the chapter for use. The pattern of Terminator armor used most widely in the 41st millennium is the Indomitus pattern. This pattern is pretty much a straight downgraded version of Tartaros, being less maneuverable, less energy efficient, and having less sensory equipment. Indomitus is pretty much the standard suit of Terminator armor in the setting. Everything we've talked about as generic features of Terminator armor is what this has. According to Warhammer Community's Grim Dark Corners Tactical Dreadnought Armor 2019, Indomitus has a large swathe of additional auxiliary systems, such as targeting matrices, biometric scanners, motion trackers and threat detectors, all of which display live information on the helmet's lenses. These are all pretty standard power armor components though, that most Space Marine armors do have. That being said, probably the most iconic feature Indomitus pattern has is the Crux Terminatus, emblazoned on its left shoulder pad. This was most likely added after the Horus Heresy, especially considering every Crux Terminatus is said to contain a shard of the Emperor's own armor, though this is likely little more than a piece of propaganda. Like we mentioned earlier, each of the Legiones Astartes had special Terminator armor variants and tactics in how they employed them. First up is the First Legion, the Dark Angels, who employed a sub-pattern of Cataphractii armor. In Horus Heresy Book 6 Retribution 2016, the details of these modifications are made clear. These are masterfully crafted suits of Cataphractii with additional ablative armor in the design of the Legion's iconography. Ablative armor is essentially extra bolt-on armor designed to take the initial impact from armor-piercing rounds. These ablative plates basically helped make Dark Angel's Cataphractii armor even more protective. During the Horus Heresy, most of the Dark Angel's Terminators were organized according to the During the Horus Heresy, the Dark Angel's Terminators were organized according to the Hexagrammaton. I'm gonna have to Google how this is pronounced. So I'm gonna wing it. The Hexagrammaton, to massively oversimplify, is the tactical doctrine of the Dark Angel's Legion, breaking down unit roles into the 6 wings. The Death Wing during the Horus Heresy was one of those wings. They were line breakers and veterans, so you can see how well this paired with Cataphractii armor. Terminators in the Dark Angel's Legion were their wrecking ball. They'd lead the charge, smashing apart enemy lines to let other units exploit their openings. The Emperor's children have only ever made aesthetic modifications to their Terminator armor, and seem to favour the Tartaros pattern. According to Liber Hereticus 2022, the Phoenix Guard were Fulgrim's chosen, warriors selected by the Primarch that exemplified everything he wanted his legion to be. Often they wore extremely ornate suits of Terminator armor, being that the Emperor's children didn't really employ Terminators in any unique way. This is as good an opportunity to talk about how the Legiones Astartes usually employed Terminators. According to Liber Astartes 2022, Terminators are generally used by the legions as frontline assault units, usually inside some form of land raider. These were always the Legion's veterans. They'd form the tip of the spear in the Astartes assaults, covering for less armoured units to secure ground they took. Possibly one of the masters of innovating on Terminator armor was the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors. They used a deadly formation known as Tyrant Siege Terminators. Shown in Horus Heresy Book 3 Extermination 2014, these Terminators were a creation of Perturabo, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors. These were up-armoured suits of Cataphractii Terminator armor with high explosive missile racks mounted on their tops. Designed to be at the forefront of Iron Warrior assaults, these Terminators are essentially a full siege assault by themselves. Their missile racks bombard the enemy, forcing their heads down, making them shockingly effective at storming breaches and enemy defenses. Part of the reason these suits were so effective is that they just took everything Cataphractii did well and magnified it. It was a match made in heaven. The Tyrant Siege Terminators were so effective that Rabute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, copied them one for use in his own legion. Known as Fulmintaris Terminators amongst the ranks of the Ultramarines Legion, in Horus Heresy Book 5 Tempest 2015, we see that the Fulmintaris were a refinement of Perturabo's tactics. Guilliman gave them advanced linked targeting systems, letting the Fulmintaris better coordinate their missile fire. This shows a fundamental difference between how the two legions approached war. Bleeding into their Terminator design, the Tyrant Siege Terminators were expected to die, expected to be essentially alone. one-man armies. Meanwhile, the Sons of Macragge are expecting to survive and work together. It's really emblematic of the 4th Legion Iron Warriors as a whole. The Siege Tyrants are a really good, effective idea, but are held back by the Iron Warriors' bitterness and lack of brotherhood, whereas the Fulmintaris Terminators were more adaptable, effectively able to serve as an artillery battery, assault force, or siege breakers. It also demonstrates one of the Ultramarines' greatest strengths: to look at the other legions, to learn their strengths, and to adopt them and improve upon them. The White Scars are very unique in how they approach their Terminators. Unlike every other legion where being a Terminator was a great honor, in the White Scars, it was mostly a punishment. Horus Heresy Book 8, Malevolence 2019, tells us that when a White Scar breached the unique philosophy of the Legion, they would be sent to the Ebon Keshiks. This is an order of Terminators who painted their armor black. There's actually no special modifications to the armor utilized by the Ebon Keshiks. Instead, it's the tactics that change. The Ebon Keshiks held ground for the White Scars, acting more as a distraction force, using their Terminator armor to weather the storm of incoming fire. They can make an effective anvil for the enemy to assault, while other White Scar forces slice through them in devastating hit-and-run assaults. Ebon Keshiks are also sent to achieve the most difficult objectives, in an attempt to redeem themselves. These will look more like standard Terminator assaults of the other legions, but sprinkled with the laughing berserker style of the White Scars. What this means is the White Scars delight in battle, and this shows even in the assaults of the dour Black Keshiks. We see in the novel Scars 2013 that not all White Scar Terminators were a punishment. Known as the Keshik, these Terminators were the personal bodyguard of their Primarch, Jagatai Khan. It's actually worth noting that many of these warriors were veterans who served with Jagatai in his homeworld, making them very old when they joined the Legion. The Primarch rarely fought with them, and his formation seemed more like a way to put these older soldiers into respectable ceremonial positions, again showing how the White Scars didn't really use Terminators. The Space Wolves and Terminator armor were a match made to be. Terminator armor just added weight to the Wolves' devastating charges, turning their assaults into unstoppable tides of axes, beards, and beer? Horus Heresy Book 7 Inferno 2017 tells us that like every other legion, the veterans were the ones graced with wearing Terminator armor. The finest of these veterans, though, were handpicked by their Primarch Leman Russ to join the Varagir Wolfguard Terminators. These warriors form the Primarch's bodyguard and are extremely skilled. Their armor was only ever aesthetically changed, bedecked in furs from their great hunts, though it is noted that they do only use Cataphractii armor. There's no clear reason for this, but we have two theories. Firstly, the Space Wolves love head-on assaults, and Cataphractii is just better for this. It's got more protection, more weight, letting the wolves smash through the enemy. The other idea plays more into the Space Wolves' traditionalist nature. The Space Wolves really cling to their traditions and their ideas, so they're a lot slower to accept new ideas, especially the older warriors which made up the Varagir. It's easy to imagine an old, grizzled wolf belly aching over the fire about his newfangled Tartaros pattern that doesn't seem to have the same soul as Cataphractii, though we can never really know for sure. The Sons of Fenris are as mysterious as they are savage. The Wordbearers Legion didn't really have any unique Terminator armor formations. This kinda speaks to their reputation for being poor warriors compared to their cousin legions, where other legions were looking to adapt and improve their armors. The Wordbearers didn't. It probably says a lot that the Wordbearers' first captain, the leader of their most prestigious Terminators, wasn't an Astartes. Instead, it was Cor Phaeron, which from the novel The First Heretic 2010 shows us he was more of a spiritual leader than a warrior. Many of you might be wondering how a non-Astartes ended up as the first captain of a Space Marine Legion. Well, to cut a long story short, real short, paraphrasing here, Cor Phaeron is Lorgar's, the Primarch of the Wordbearers, foster father. All this reinforces that the Wordbearers' doctrine towards their Terminators was more concerned with the spiritual rather than the tactical. The Imperial Fists, just like the Wordbearers, have no examples of innovation on their Terminator armor, though where the Wordbearers come from a focus elsewhere, it seems the Fists come from a simple lack of innovation. The Imperial Fists are superb warriors, but they're not creative. so innovating new tactics and designs just isn't in their wheelhouse, or that of their Primarch Rogel Dawns. What's really interesting here is that the Imperial Fists didn't adopt the Siege Terminators like the Ultramarines did. They absolutely would have benefited from these suits, though considering the Imperial Fists and Iron Warriors' legendary rivalry, it's pretty obvious as to why they didn't. Though it's more than likely the Imperial Fists heavily favoured Cataphractii over Tartaros considering how well it fits their doctrine. The Terminators of the Night Lord's Legion are probably the closest thing to proper warriors in that whole legion. Horus Heresy Book 9 Crusade 2020 covers the Contakar Terminators. These were brutish and thuggish shock troops, striking terror and fear via brutal, sudden assaults. Not only would they butcher the enemy into bloody pulp, but they would burn the land, destroying infrastructure, agriculture, and industry. Real burn their crops and salt the earth style stuff. Yet, this being the Night Lords, the Contakar did come with a price. If they saw any weakness in their commander, they would kill him and try to usurp his position. You see, the Contakar were always picked from the Straman nobility, the old ruling class of the Night Lord's homeworld. Frankly, at their core, though they are more upfront in their violence, the Contakar are just as cowardly as any other Night Lord. Though, if there's one group that is true-blooded Astartes amongst the Night Lords, it is the Atramentar. Shown in Prince of Crows 2012, and pretty much any other Night Lord's Heresy book featuring Sevatar, Sevatar was the first company captain of the Night Lords, and frankly was kind of the leader of the Night Lord's Legion. Conrad Kurz was never really sane. Even before the Horus Heresy, he was unhinged. So that left Sevatar to lead the 8th, and he did this via the Atramentar. The Atramentar under Sevatar were loyal, competent warriors, and brutally effective. When any other Night Lord would have betrayed their brother, the Atramentar remained loyal to Sevatar. That's not to say they didn't fight like Night Lords. They'd push their brothers in the way of blows, strike and fade, ambush, use pocket sand, every dirty trick in the book. There was only about a company's worth of them at their peak, but these were really the only Night Lords that could be trusted to hold ground. Without them, the Night Lord's Legion would have fallen apart, even before the Heresy. Which, by the way, it did, the moment most of them and Sevatar were captured by the Dark Angels. The Ninth Legion, the Blood Angels, used their Terminators in a way you'd think the Imperial Fists would. Known as the Crimson Paladins, Horus Heresy Book 8 Malevolence 2019 illustrates how these warriors were a bulwark of Sanguinius. Part of the First Sphere, essentially the first company of the Blood Angels Legion, the Paladins were technically part of Sanguinius's extensive array of bodyguards. The unit you're more probably familiar with from the First Sphere is the Sanguinary Guard, where the Sanguinary Guard were all about the attack and keeping up with their Primarch's angelic assaults. The Crimson Paladins were all about guarding his flank and holding ground for him to fall back to. This is even reflected in their dour, sullen demeanours, when contrasted to the relatively more bombastic personalities of the Sanguinary Guard. This role is signified in their war gear, wearing Cataphractii warplate, wielding heavy weapons and even Coriolis pattern power shields, which were essentially handheld force fields. These Terminators were utterly vital in protecting the flanks of Blood Angel assaults. Where the Space Wolves hit like a truck, bowling over the entire front line, the Blood Angel strike is more like a spear. Their tactics just don't have the weight like a Space Wolves assault does, though their attacks are much faster. It means that their assaults are a little more vulnerable, a vulnerability that the Crimson Paladins nicely cover for. The World Eaters employed their Terminators the same way as they employed everything. Blood-crazed assaults with little to no organisation. The Butcher's Nails meant there was never really an option for anything else. The Butcher's Nails, of course, being the device driven into the skull of its bearer, that inflicts intense pain when the recipient isn't slaughtering people and causes sudden, uncontrollable fits of rage. So ridden by rage could a World Eater become, that at the outbreak of the Heresy, upon the blood-soaked earth of Istvan, a new cadre of Terminators was formed for the Legion, the Red Butchers. Detailed to us in Horus Heresy Book 2 Massacre 2013, this cadre of Terminators are comprised of World Eaters so lost to Berserker fury that Tech Marines have been forced to imprison them in suits of specially made Terminator armour. Of course, based on Cataphractii plate, these suits are adorned in chains and collars, a symbol of their true purpose, to restrain the wearer. First seeing action during the drop site massacre, the Red Butchers were horrifyingly effective, tearing apart loyalist formations like paper. Once the battle was done, the tech marines who made these suits activated them, or more specifically, deactivated them, imprisoning the wearer in their own armor, screaming in rage. The Death Guard have two formations of Terminators for which they're fairly renowned for, mainly because both these formations survived all the way to the 41st millennium, something unique amongst the Legion Terminators. The first of these comes to us from Horus Heresy Book 1 Betrayal 2012, that being the Death Shroud Terminators. The Death Shroud sported custom-made Terminator armor, seemingly being an up-armored variant of the Tartaros pattern. The armor also likely sports the Death Guard's usual upgrades for their preferred style of warfare, that of course being chemical and attrition war. Basically every Marine in the Death Guard is a master of mixing toxins that make mustard gas look like bad cologne. These upgrades are usually improved ceilings and advanced filtration systems. Along with their impressive suits, Death Shrouds carry large power scythes, known as Man Reapers. These mighty weapons weren't the only weapons the Death Shrouds carried though. They also had chem flamers mounted to their wrists, letting them spray their foes with a noxious mix in the midst of melee. The Death Shroud were able to cleave through crowds of even Astartes with their war gear, and served as their Primarch's personal bodyguard. The second formation comes to us from Horus Heresy Book 2 Massacre 2013, informally known as Grave Wardens. These were units of Cataphractii Terminators, their armor mounting similar modifications to those of the Death Shroud, to help them handle heavy chem weapons which they carried. The Grave Wardens weren't a formalized formation like the Death Shroud were. It was simply a collective name for the Terminators skilled in the Death Guard's way of war. Pretty much all of these were under the Death Guard's first captain, Typhus. After Typhus fell to the corruption of Nurgle, these Terminators were some of the first to follow him. Later, these Terminators would become what we know in modern 40k as Blightlord Terminators. The Thousand Sons, like the Death Guard, are renowned for their Terminators, again mainly because their formation survived to the 41st millennium. The novel A Thousand Sons 2010 calls them Sekhmet Terminators, but they're more commonly known as Scarab Occult Terminators. Seemingly based on Tartaros pattern Terminator armor, during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, these formations consisted of the greatest Psykers in the Thousand Sons Legion, each highly respected among the warriors of Prospero. They served as their Primarch, Magnus the Red's personal bodyguard. They were phenomenally renowned for their resilience, many Primarchs referring to them as automata, possibly due to their ability to shake off seemingly deadly blows, though it is more likely due to how robotically they fought, due to the intense focus their psychic powers required. The Sons of Horus were just like the Spaceballs when it came to Terminators. The extra bulk Terminators added to the famed spearhead assaults of the 16th Legion were immensely effective. A great example of this in Horus Rising 2006, when assaulting an enemy position, the Sons of Horus were pinned down by enemy fire. The Justarin Terminators took the lead. They were the Sons of Horus's absolute best, the tip of the spear. Clad in mighty Cataphractii plate, they waded through oceans of fire and charged the enemy position. The Justarin were the very best of the Sons of Horus. Fittingly, they were effectively wiped out when the Sons of Horus were shattered at the Siege of Terra. Though, just like the 16th, the remnants of the Justarin would be reborn as part of the Black Legion. Also, a quick point of curiosity, Abaddon himself was the head of the Justarin for all that time, and it would be the colours of he and his Justarin warriors that would define the colours of the Black Legion. The Salamanders Legion, beyond the Saturnine suits created by Vulcan, had its Fire Drake Terminators, covered in the Liber Astartes 2022. These warriors made up the elite of the Legion. Similar to many others, they were clad in masterwork suits of Cataphractii, befitting a Legion renowned for the quality of its craftsmanship. Though these suits sported a secret weapon, Drake Scale. Taken from the fire drakes of Nocturne, these scale hides are strong enough to survive a swim even in lava. Though that's not all. Fire Drake Terminators bore a prototype system that would become commonplace within the Imperium. Dragon Scale Storm Shields, the precursor to the handheld force field generator you see on modern assault Terminators. You might remember we talked about Coriolis pattern power shields earlier for the Blood Angels. Basically, they were another prototype being explored in the development of the Storm Shield, though the Coriolis was deemed far too power hungry for widespread use. Precious few warriors in the Raven Guard ever donned suits of Terminator armor, though The White Scars might have the rep for hating Terminator armor, but the Raven Guard are the real haters. The only notable formation of Terminators in the Raven Guard were known as the Deliverers. According to the exemplary battles of the Age of Darkness, the Breaking of the Perfect Fortress 2022, these basically weren't even Raven Guard. They were the Terran-born veterans of the Legion, from before the return of Corax. The Raven Guard, before Corax, served under Horus and his Legion. The Deliverers even trained alongside the Justarin. They were effectively just sons of Horus wearing the badges of Corax. Though there's hints of more nuance to them than that, this idea that they became Corax's quiet rage. Sadly, the Deliverers never got any notable book appearances, though they are certainly an area of the Raven Guard Legion ripe for expansion. Particularly fitting for the Alpha Legion, their most prized Terminator formation wasn't widely known across the Imperium. The Linnaean Terminators, according to Horus Heresy Book 3 Extermination 2014, were ruthlessly efficient. You see, they weren't widely known, not because the Alpha Legion was hiding their existence, but because instead, they simply never left survivors. These Terminators were clad in ornate Cataphractii plate, wielded Volkite charges, and were masters of close assault. Honestly, they didn't fight like anything else in the Alpha Legion, which is what made them so deadly. They would emerge from Alpha Legion ambushes and be utterly intractable even to counterattack. We've saved perhaps the most important Legion for last. At last, when it comes to Terminator armor, the Iron Hands were the premier adopters and master innovators when it came to suits of this heavy plate. The Iron Hands had two notable Terminator formations. Firstly, the Morlocks, which according to Death of Canopus 2023, the Morlocks were Ferrus Manus' personal bodyguard. They guarded his inner sanctum, but genuinely were only seemingly tolerated on protocol. Only selected from amongst the finest fighters of the Averni clan, one of the clans that controlled the Iron Hands' homeworld. Sadly, this formation met their end alongside their Primarch on Istvan. The second formation is the Gorgons. The Terminator sported custom-made Terminator armor. Liber Astartes 2022 calls it Gorgon Plate. It was one of numerous sub-patterns of Terminator armor developed by the Iron Hands. Based on early Indomitus pattern, the Gorgon pattern has some notable upgrades. It was fitted with a new kind of shield generator that converted incoming shots into blinding flashes of light. Light so intense that it could not only blind foes but burn them. Though the heat and electrochemical toxin bleed from the armor limited the wearer's agility, it also meant the Marine had to undergo extensive cybernetics to don it. Pretty much everyone who put on Gorgon Power pattern armor wore it for the rest of their life. After the end of the Horus Heresy, most of the Terminator armor and formations we've just covered were lost. Terminator armor became extremely rare. Thus, the concept of Terminator honors came to be. Marines had to truly prove themselves worthy to don Terminator armor. Little changed in the tactics Marines used when employing Terminator armor. Merely the scale. Very few chapters have had the number of suits needed for mass Terminator assaults like during the Horus Heresy. Though two that we can point to are the Nova Marines and the Dark Angels. The Nova Marines' first company has 100 suits of Terminator armor, enough to outfit their entire first company, and the Dark Angels in kind have the Death Wing, a company full of Terminators. We would be amiss if we didn't mention the Arcanak pattern Terminator armor, only seen utilized by the Minotaurs chapter and only mentioned in Imperial Armor Volume 12, The Fall of Orpheus 2013. This armor's origins are a mystery, and we know pretty much nothing about it. And if you're thinking it's the cool, Spartan-inspired set Asterion Moloch is wearing, well, that's just Tartaros pattern armor. Perhaps one day we'll find out more about this mysterious pattern of armor. The Grey Knights wear specially modified Indomitus pattern power armor. Grim Dark Corner's Tactical Dreadnought Armor 2019 tells us that these suits are etched with a psychoconductive matrix that provides unrivaled protection against the influence of the warp. Now, the Grey Knights also have very distinctive helmets, similar to those worn by the Black Templars. These are known as Crusader helms. This is especially confusing as Mark II power armor is known as Crusader pattern armor, though if you've ever wondered what those super knightly marine helms are called, well, now you know. And this wouldn't be a Space Marine equipment video if we didn't mention a weird piece of equipment that only the Deathwatch have. Coming to us from Deathwatch The Long Vigil 2020 is the Fura pattern Terminator armor. We don't know much about this pattern, but we do know it's exclusively used by the Deathwatch. We do have one good lead on what it might be like, and that's Garen Branitar. Part of Kill Team Cassius, Garen has a unique set of Terminator armor, one with an underslung melter on his power fist. It also seemingly sports additional filtration systems in the helmet. Whether or not the suit Garen wears is Führer pattern is unconfirmed, but it would still be fitting, especially as he is the only official Deathwatch Terminator model ever produced. Everything else has just been regular Terminators with an upgrade sprue. Now, the Legiones Astartes are of course not the only force in the Imperium to use Terminator armor. The Emperor's own bodyguard, the vaunted Custodes as we mentioned earlier, also use Terminator armor. After the success of Terminator armor amongst the Legiones Astartes, a set was developed for the Adeptus Custodes, or known at the time as the Legiones Custodes. The first pattern made for the Emperor's companions was known as a Quilon pattern. According to Horus Heresy Book 7 Inferno 2017, this armor is based on Cataphractii. Though you might not be able to tell, the armor has had a full ground-up redesign, rumored to be done by the Emperor himself. Since this new pattern was being built around the Custodes' enhanced physiology, more strain could be placed on this armor, allowing the armor to be fitted with more power systems, removing its main flaw, that being the lack of maneuverability. This armor was employed by the Custodes right up until the end of the Horus Heresy, normally being used for defensive or boarding actions. It is no exaggeration to say that the men who wore this armor were one-man armies. By the time the Custodes returned to the battlefields of the 41st millennium, they sported a new pattern of Terminator armor, a Laris pattern. According to Codex Adeptus Custodes 8th edition 2018, is the single greatest man-portable armor available to the Imperium at this time. Its plates made from a complex weave of adamantium and auramite. Auramite is the super alloy used by the Custodes and is nigh impenetrable. You'll find that most of the Primarch's personal suits of armor are also made with this material. The origins of this armor is a mystery. Its existence does lend credence to the idea that the Custodes didn't spend 10,000 years sitting idle. Perhaps they were working away with carefully curated tech priests to develop these marvels. The armor truly is a technological wonder. The wearer is pretty much unencumbered by the armor. Their strength is magnified and they can survive blasts from macro cannon shells. That's a void ship grade weapon, aka something a Titan has to be scared of. In a fun and roundabout way as well, the 8th edition Codex claiming this is the single greatest armor currently available to the Imperium does kind of hint towards the notion that Saturnine pattern Terminator armor has not made it to 40k, although to be fair a Warhammer community article did actually hint at that as well. Terminator armor really illustrates the great cycle of empires that is the core of 40k's universe. There's this clear trend, alluded to in the Twice Dead King series, that the Imperium is just one more in a long line of empires that ruled our galaxy. That all these empires go through the same cycle. It starts with conquering, and Cataphractii armor reflects that. A pattern built for marching through breaches and city walls. Tartaros marks a change in the Imperium. Space Marines go from looking blocky to smoother, more akin to the Eldar. Galactic empires that fell before them. Yet, before the Imperium could reach the lofty heights of those previous empires, the fires of the Horus Heresy rip it apart. An era of stagnation and regression, where the Indomitus pattern becomes the main armor used. A pale reflection of the suits worn by the Imperium's golden age. If you line up all the Terminators for the Space Marines, you can see the history of the Imperium there. You can see the rise and fall of its technology. Though it's only a small part of the universe, it's amazing how much story can be in the armor our heroes wear. Hi guys, Tom here. No script for this part, just winging it. I got a few things I wanted to quickly mention. First, I didn't make it very clear in the video that we've just gone over, but there is a source. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'll find it and put it in the description. That says that the Iron Hands had multitudes of Terminator prototypes, not just the ones mentioned in the video, but others as well. We can kind of see this with the Heresy-era Iron Fathers. They wear a form of Terminator armor that doesn't actually have a name. It's basically a combination of Terminator Artificer armor and a Tech Marines suit of armor. So it's fun. It's fun. The other thing I wanted to mention is this kind of me about a little bit as I was doing the script and kind of putting the images on the screen, and that's that the Death Guard Grave Wardens and the Salamander Fire Drakes, their armor is Cataphractii, but it looks like Tartaros. And I was really racking my head over this. I mean, they do have the main elements of Cataphractii, the engine chunk in the back being the main part and the layered shoulders. But they're very smooth like Tartaros, so it was a bit fun. The other thing as well that I wanted to mention that I kind of touched on in the video is about Space Marine Terminators in 40k and how very few chapters can field them in like massive quantities. There is actually some lore contradiction on this that really annoys me as a homebrewer that I just wanted to bring up. And that's that if you go through pretty much any Space Marine codex, they'll all be pretty consistent about the fact that Terminator armor is really rare. That only the best of the first company get to wear it, because it is so rare. Most Space Marine chapters will have anywhere from 15 to 25 suits of Terminator armor max, maybe a couple more in reserve. But really, really low numbers, Few chapters can field more than that, which makes the Nova Marines and the Dark Angels Deathwing really, really special. Although the Nova Marines' reason for having loads of Terminator armors in the one source, which I've forgotten, is really daft, because it's basically them saying, we have loads of Terminators because we just don't use our Terminators, so we've stockpiled them, which is funny. It's whatever. But the thing that annoys me about this is there is a sort of a counter source to what I've just said. So you've got all these Space Marine codexes that say Terminator armor is super rare and even the first company barely has any. But then there's one lore source that explicitly says that every chapter has over 100 suits. And that source is, I think it's the 8th edition Chaos Space Marines Codex, which is a really funny place to find lore for loyalist Space Marines. I suppose you could look at it from their perspective, like the Chaos Space Marines perspective, because it's written in the context of Chaos Space Marine Terminators trying to say how for them, Terminator armor is even more rare, even less abundant than it is for the Loyalists. And so they're kind of like trying to paint some comparison. So it's really funny. It really chaps my trying to compartmentalize those two sort of conflicting points of view. Anyways, yeah, that's it. That's it. Oh yeah, by the way, we're on Twitch now. Astartes Anonymous on Twitch. We do a homebrew stream every Saturday, and we do a variety stream every Tuesday, and we're looking to do a stream on Thursday as well. So I'll put that in the link down below. Come join us on Twitch, and we'll have a good time. Right, you take it easy, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Toodaloo.